The call came in just as the sun was starting to peek over the mountains. "Jake, this is Base. You copy?" I grabbed the radio, my coffee still in my hand. "This is Jake. Go ahead, Sarah." Sarah hardly ever called this early unless it was urgent. "We've got a missing person, Alex Reed. His emergency beacon went off around 3:00 a.m. near Mount Chester. Then it went dead." My stomach tightened. Alex. He had been warned about the restricted areas so many times. Did he call back after? Negative. His car's at the Thunder Lake Park trailhead. The cops found his logbook. Something about following the wolf's path to the treasure. Ring any bells? I rubbed my eyes. The last time I saw Alex was 3 days ago in the visitor center parking lot. "Yeah," I said, recalling our last encounter. "Jake, you need to hear this," Alex had said, holding up a beat-up journal. "The containers, the maps, the symbols. It all points to the gulch. Have you ever seen anything like this?" "Not yet," I replied, grabbing my gear from my locker. "Weather station says clouds are rolling in. We've got maybe 6 hours before the storm hits." "Great, just great," I muttered now to Sarah. "I'm heading out. I'll keep you posted on Channel 3. I gathered my gear, making sure I had everything for a few days in the wilderness. I was worried but trying not to panic. My brother had gone down these conspiracy rabbit holes before, and he always came out okay. But this time felt different. His words echoed in my mind. "The wolves know, Jake. They're guarding something. I've seen their eyes in the dark. They're not normal wolves." The drive to Thunder Lake trailhead took under an hour. I found Alex's Jeep in the lot. Inside, I saw scattered maps, empty energy drink cans, and his tablet displaying a topo map of Mount Chester. "Dispatch, this is Jake. I'm at the vehicle. Starting track west toward the gulch." "Copy that. Be advised, we've had reports of increased wolf activity in that area in the past week." Of course, I thought. Because this day wasn't already complicated enough. The trail was easy to follow at first, but then Alex had taken a sharp left, following a game trail into the brush. Just like him, I thought, always taking the most direct route, even if it was the hardest and most dangerous. I followed his tracks for another half hour. He was moving fast, not taking his time to navigate safely. Several times I had to double back where he'd gone down steep hills. There were signs of his reckless passage everywhere. A wolf howled in the distance, not that far off. I checked my watch, 8:45 a.m. "Dispatch, I've got activity in Sector 7. Any rangers nearby?" Only static. I tried again and again. Nothing. The trail got even more treacherous. Alex's footprints were more recent here. I was getting closer, maybe just a few hours behind him. Another wolf howl, this one answered by several more from all directions. I took my rifle off my shoulder and held it ready. Then I saw something strange up ahead. "Alex." I called out. "Alex Reed." I heard a stick break behind me. I turned and saw a pair of glowing eyes. A massive wolf stepped into view, its eyes reflecting the dim light. It was huge, reaching up to my waist, with dark gray fur. The creature and I stared at each other. "Base, this is Jake. I have pork." My voice trailed off. The radio at my hip was no longer making any sound. No static, nothing. The wolf cocked its head, as if confused. The rest of the pack emerged from the fog behind it, standing in perfect formation. Then I heard Alex's voice from above. "Jake, are you there? You have to see this. They showed me something. Something that can't be real, Bob." The alpha wolf took a step forward. I knew that if I followed it up the cliff, everything would change. I just had to decide if I was ready for that. I took a deep breath and followed the wolf up the cliff face. We climbed for several minutes. It was getting darker, and the air was getting colder. There was a tension, a feeling like something big was about to happen. The alpha wolf looked at me for a second, then led me toward a small opening in the rock. The other wolves disappeared into the fog, leaving only the alpha to guide me, if that's what it was doing. "Jake, you coming, man?" Alex called again. He sounded excited, just like he had so many times before. I kept my rifle at a low ready and followed the wolf, thinking of all the times I'd found Alex in a place like this, looking for something. Most of the time, it was nothing. But occasionally, it was some ancient petroglyph or a piece of metal he'd found, and he'd get all worked up, thinking it was part of some ancient treasure or a lost civilization. The crevice led to a series of switchbacks that took us up the canyon wall. The alpha was moving slowly now, like it wanted me to keep up. Its fur had a strange metallic sheen that I hadn't noticed before. "Remember Eagle Cliff?" I yelled up to Alex, trying to keep him talking as I climbed. "One you were sure you'd found a Ute burial chamber. This is different," he yelled back. "This is real. I've been telling the truth, Jake. The containers, the wolves, everything." It became more and more dangerous, with steep drops on one side and sheer rock on the other. The alpha seemed to float across the rocky landscape, easily going over parts that I had to scale with my hands and feet. "Like that real Spanish gold cache you found last spring?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light but feeling my chest tighten as I remembered dragging him out of that collapsed mine shaft, the one that turned out to be old mining equipment. "You never could see the bigger picture, Jake," Alex said, his laugh sounding off. "Always with your logic and reason. But they've told me things, Jake. Things that change everything." The wolf led me onto a small ledge and stopped, staring at me. I could see a cave behind it. My brother was standing at the entrance, and he looked different somehow. "What happened to you, Alex?" I asked. "You look." He laughed that weird laugh again. "No, Jake, I'm saved. The wolves, they're not beasts. They're guardians, keepers of an ancient power." I took a step closer, and the alpha's eyes followed me. "What are you protecting?" "The containers. The ones I said I needed to show you." Alex nodded back toward the cave. "They're not buried treasure or Native American relics. They're impossible." Suddenly, the wolf turned its head toward the cave entrance, and a low growl rumbled in its chest. Not aggressive, but more of a warning. Alex's face went from happy to worried. "We have to hurry," he said, looking at the sky. "The storm's coming, and they only allow visitors during certain alignments. You have to see this now, Jake, while the gateway is still open." Part of me wanted to run, to call for backup, to follow the rules. But I couldn't. "What am I looking at here, Alex?" He moved away from the wall, and I saw a tunnel leading into the rock, with a pattern similar to the one on the cylinder. "The wolves didn't come across the containers, Jake," Alex said quietly. "The containers came across them, changed them, and now they've been waiting for someone to receive their message." Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the alpha's eyes began to glow even brighter, along with the flickering lights in its fur. "One more time, Jake," Alex said, offering his hand. "Want to find out what's really in your mountains?" I looked at the wolf, then at Alex, then at the impossible tunnel behind them. I knew what I was about to do was against every rule and regulation. I knew there was no way I could ever explain this to anyone, even if I tried. But a part of me had always wanted to know what was causing all the strange things that had been happening in this place. And now I had the chance to find out. I took a step forward, and the alpha wolf began to glow. The world seemed to tilt and blur as the alpha's light intensified, bathing the mountainside in a strange silver glow. Time stretched like taffy, seconds turning into minutes as the light pulsed in patterns that matched the tunnel walls. The storm drew closer, its thunder now a constant, low rumble that vibrated through the rock beneath my feet. In those endless moments between decision and what comes after, the afternoon light faded, as if the approaching storm had sped up the day's end, plunging the gulch into early dusk. The light from the alpha wolf's face dimmed, and I blinked, my eyes adjusting to the darkness. Alex was already halfway into the tunnel. I was tempted to follow him, but didn't want to get too far from the entrance. A howl came from nearby, but it wasn't the alpha wolf. It was coming from further down the gorge. The alpha wolf turned to look in the direction of the sound, then ran off, leaving me alone. I checked my radio again. Still nothing. The clouds had grown thicker, casting shadows over the geometric shapes. Alex. I yelled down the tunnel. Nothing. I could smell wood smoke nearby, which was unusual since most people weren't allowed to have campfires up here. I went back to the entrance and looked down into the gulch. A small plume of smoke was rising in the distance, about half a mile away. I began to climb down carefully. The path the wolf had taken was too steep to follow without falling, so I had to make my own way down, using some of the paths I'd found years earlier. "Base, this is Jake," I said again, mostly out of habit, investigating possible camp whereabouts in Sector 8 Point. As I got nearer to the source of the smoke, I started to smell something else. Something metallic and sharp. I saw a flicker of orange light through the trees and realized someone had started a small campfire. I gripped my rifle and walked slowly toward it. Finally, I came to a small clearing and saw the equipment laid out: the satellite GPS, the thermal imaging camera, and the tool for digging and finding metal. And I saw Alex, sitting beside the campfire. He had a golden cylinder next to him, which was open. "He brought me the quick way," Alex said without looking up. "You took the long way." "Did the wolves show you?" He chuckled, the same strange chuckle as in the cave. "No, not the wolves. We keep calling them that, but that's not what they are anymore." I looked around, closer to the fire pit now. The ground around here was disturbed. It looked like something had been digging. "What are you carrying in there?" I asked, even though I thought I shouldn't. He looked up finally, and I saw his eyes shimmering in the firelight, reflecting silver like the alphas had. "The truth about your mountains, Jake. About why some parts of it don't show up right on satellite scans. Why compasses don't work properly near the old mine entrances." "What the hell are you talking about?" I said, but my throat was dry. "Let's get you back to base. Get you looked at, Dot." "Still playing the ranger, huh?" He grinned, but it was a wrong grin. "Still trying to keep order in a place that just doesn't allow it. Didn't you ever wonder why so many rangers were assigned to watch these areas? Why certain documents are redacted from even senior staff?" The wind picked up again, causing a strange electricity in the air. The fire dimmed, then grew brighter, turning blue. "The containers were here first," Alex said, his fingers tracing the gold exterior. "Before the first settlers, before the tribes, before..." He paused, cocking his head as if listening to something I couldn't hear. Before time was time. Another crack of thunder sounded. I should call for backup, I thought. But the radio wouldn't work here, and we both knew it. "Please, let me see." Alex's eyes lit up. He reached into the canister and pulled out something that hurt my eyes to look at, as if it was bending in on itself in a strange and impossible way. "They've been looking for a man like you, Jake. A man who can see beyond the veil and still follow the rules." He handed me the impossible item. "Here, they want you to have it bought." There was a flash of lightning, and I saw the eyes again. But this time, there were more. A lot more. Dozens of pairs of silver eyes watching from the woods, just beyond the tree line. Their beautiful metallic fur shone like liquid mercury. The alpha walked out from the trees and into the clearing. It looked bigger than before. It came to a stop between us, looked at Alex, then turned to me. "Last chance to turn back, Jake," Alex said. "Last chance to return to your paperwork and rules and sensible answers." I looked at the object in Alex's hand, at the watching pack, at the storm dark sky above. 15 years of ranging these mountains, and I had always known there were things I couldn't explain, things I'd written off or filed away in that part of my mind reserved for later investigation. Later had finally arrived. I reached for the object, and the world began to change. Time seemed to stretch like taffy as my hand moved through the air, each millisecond expanding into an eternity. The storm above held its breath, lightning frozen in mid-strike, raindrops suspended like diamonds around us. Then reality snapped back like a rubber band, and 3 heartbeats passed in complete darkness. When awareness returned, I found myself still reaching, but the clearing had transformed. What had been wild and storm-swept was now eerily still, bathed in the supernatural glow of a fire I didn't remember being lit. Its flames cast impossible shadows through the mist that had materialized around us. I reached out and took what Alex was holding. As soon as I touched it, I knew it was something unnatural. The firelight changed, and the air hummed with a frequency I couldn't hear but could feel reverberating in my bones. "Easy," Alex said, his silver eyes staring back at me. "I hear the first time you touch one. It's electric." It was hot and cold, smooth and rough, all in one, and it was impossible to look at. "What am I holding?" I asked. At least, I think I did. He was interrupted by a growl from the alpha. The wolf had come closer. "They're happy," Alex said, smiling. "They've been waiting a long time for someone else to see." It pulsed once, giving me a strange feeling in my arm. It wasn't painful, but it was like the memory of pain, as if I'd had 1,000 injuries all at once, but only in my mind. "Alex, I don't think we should." There was another pulse. Everything around me began to spin, and I tried to let go of the object in my hand but couldn't. "Just let it happen," Alex said. "It's okay." I was hunting in the woods, feasting on bloody meat, watching the stars move across the night sky, the mountains rise and fall. "Jesus Christ," I croaked, or attempted to. My mouth felt funny, like it was full of teeth, howling a cry of pain. I heard Alex scream and fall to the ground beside the fire, convulsing. I looked to see what was going on and saw him on the ground, fighting to get the object out of his hand. I was the wolf, seeing the lights falling from the sky. I was the mountain, feeling the metal bite into me. I was the wind, carrying the message to the world. "Make it stop," I said, but it came out more like a growl. The alpha was standing in front of me. The image of a wolf was replaced by something else, something that made my head spin. I instantly understood what had happened. The containers hadn't been discovered by the wolves. The containers had created the wolves. Alex screamed, and I dropped the canister. As it hit the ground, the link was broken. "Alex." I wobbled over to his fallen body. "They showed you," he said, blood coming out of his nose. "You saw it too." The alpha stepped out from between us, looking down at the object. The other wolves were all staring at it as well. "What do we do now?" I asked, unsure if my question was directed at Alex, the wolves, or the unfathomable being I just touched the mind of. Alex sat up, wiping blood from his face. "What now?" I asked him. "No, we decide what to do with what they've shown us." The fire went out. It was dark again, except for the dim metallic shine of the wolf fur and the faint glow from the canister. The Rangers, I said, my mind slowly coming back to me. The secret files. They knew about this, right? He laughed a little despite it all. Some of them. Not everything. Not what we just saw. The Alpha's ears perked up suddenly, and I felt a change in the atmosphere. "They're coming," Alex said, silver eyes wide. "The others. The ones who left the containers." I looked up at the sky, my mind going back to those memories of lights coming down from above. The Alpha rubbed against my leg, sending a zap of static electricity through me. "Okay, Jake," Alex said. "Do you want to see how far the rabbit hole goes?" It started to rain, and steam rose from the object as the droplets touched its hot surface. I felt the world changing around me. Like the laws of physics and everything I knew about the mountains were being rewritten. And whatever was up there was on its way down to check on its investment. Rain began to pour down, and we backed away from the object as lightning crackled in the sky. The Alpha growled at us, and through the rain, I saw dark shapes approaching. The standoff between us and the Alpha had gone from tense to terrifying. Only a few minutes remained until nightfall, and those few minutes had passed while we were distracted by the object. Now we were surrounded. Suddenly, there was a loud feral growl that did not sound like any of the Alpha's prior growls. This one sounded far less restrained and far more dangerous. I reached for my gun but found my hands still wouldn't work properly after touching that thing. More wolves began to come out of the forest around us, but these ones weren't like the others. They seemed larger, more deformed, almost as if they were growing and mutating. Their jaws were foaming with a noxious ooze that seemed to burn the dirt below them. "Alex," I muttered. "Stay still." The man was already backing away, looking terrified. "It's not supposed to happen this way," he choked out. They said. One of the new wolves came into view. It was the biggest one, the leader, and its eyes glimmered with the same glow I had seen coming from the canister. But there was no intelligence in those eyes. Only hunger. "The canister," Alex choked. "It wasn't an invitation, it was a lure." It suddenly dawned on me that we weren't selected. We were baited. The Alpha stood between us and the pack, ready to protect us. But it didn't look nearly as powerful compared to these monsters. "Jake," Alex said, "run." The monsters disappeared from view for a second, only to reappear at the other side of the clearing. They were on top of Alex now, biting and tearing at him. "Alex." I called out, tumbling forward, my instinct to help battling with my instinct to survive. The Alpha didn't hesitate for a second. It struck me with its body, pushing me backward to the ground. I saw its eyes, and I realized this was the law of the jungle. This was the true nature of the world, and it had been amplified by the canisters, perhaps. I saw blood and heard the fire crackling. I saw Alex through the horde of mutated wolves. He looked at me and screamed, but the sound was drowned out by the hungry growls. I saw his hand reaching for me, and I saw the look of realization in his eyes. Then, nothing. One of the wolves turned around. It was the largest one of them, except for the Alpha. It looked at me. I put my finger on the trigger, but the Alpha pushed itself against my leg again. "No," it seemed to say. "Watch." The wolf approached me. Its movements were erratic and reminded me of a broken robot. It stopped just in front of me. I felt its breath on my face. It smelled like metal. It looked me in the eyes, and I felt its mind touch mine. It was completely different from the mind I had felt when I touched the canister. This was a mind of pure hunger, and it was twisted and wrong. And then it backed away from me. I didn't understand why at first, but then I realized it had something to do with the Alpha. It had marked me somehow. They had taken Alex. They had what they wanted. They backed off and disappeared into the cave. Their eyes glowed in the darkness for a little while, and then they were gone. The Alpha looked at me. It nodded. It was as if it told me that I was one of them now. I had been marked. I belonged to them. I heard thunder in the sky. The storm was here. The Alpha's pack revealed themselves from the surrounding forest. What do I do now? I asked again, broken. The Alpha didn't answer me, but instead turned away from the fire and disappeared into the night. I sat there for a long time, staring at the fire until I heard a familiar voice on the radio. Jake, this is Base. Do you read me? I looked at the blood on the ground, at the canister. There would be no way to ever explain this. Jake, is it? I said. I need you to come. You'll need to bring the tranq rifles. The big ones. Because there was something out here in these mountains that was going to spread, and I had a feeling it wasn't just those wolves I saw. It took nearly 3 hours for the backup to arrive. I waited by the now extinguished fire pit, gun drawn, watching the shadows for movement as the moon disappeared behind the peaks of the mountains and the sun began to rise. The canister began to glow with a strange golden light. The radio went silent again, and I was left standing there, breathing in the cold air and the scent of blood, wondering what the hell I was going to do next. Think, I said to myself, growling the word. Think like a ranger. I looked around and saw Alex's backpack. I wanted to leave it for his family, so they would have something to bury. I took a step toward it. The canister shifted in my hands, and all at once, I could smell everything. No, I wanted to say, but my mouth felt strange, crowded with teeth. Not this time. My knees buckled, and I fell to the ground. My fingers dug into the dirt, and I could feel the vibrations inside it, the life inside it. Not just the worms and the insects and the small creatures, but the life of the entire world. The beating hearts of every living thing in these mountains was in my ears, beating like a drum. The lifeblood of the deer, the elk, the mice, and the bears. All of it was in my head, in my veins, in my brain. The history of the place played out before me, and it was a history I had never known before. I saw the native tribes who had lived here, avoiding the caves and the canyons for reasons that had nothing to do with sacred and everything to do with fear. I saw the settlers going missing, not for the reasons we believed, but for reasons far more sinister. I saw the rangers over the decades, writing reports about the strange things they'd seen, trying to warn the outside world in their own way. My bones began to crack. I tried to scream, but it came out as a howl. The moon was up above, and it was pulling at something inside me. Control it, I panted, pushing myself up from the ground. Control. But it was clear I had no control over this. The canister continued to glow, and I was beginning to see things that I could have never imagined. The park was not just the park. It was an experiment that had been going on since before the beginning of mankind. I could see the first wolves. I could see the first wolves that had been turned into werewolves. I could see the aliens coming down from the sky in their spaceships, experimenting on the animals. And I could see the alpha werewolf, protecting the borders of the park from something I couldn't see. And I could feel my bones breaking, my skin turning inside out, my body growing larger. I was turning into a werewolf. Jake, can you hear me? My radio squawked, a voice speaking inhuman. I raced for it and grabbed it with my hand, which was now more like a claw. I squeezed it and crushed the plastic in my powerful grip. The light generated by the canister blinked once and went out. And suddenly, I understood what Alex had been talking about. The canisters found the wolves, not the other way around. They were designed to trigger the transformation in certain animals. The wolves were not the only ones. I roared in triumph, not in pain. My howl was not one of anguish but of victory. And by the sounds of it, I wasn't the only one who felt that way. The alpha's howl was loud in the distance, much closer than I would have expected. They were coming back, and they weren't coming to kill me. My radio crackled and died as I lost the last traces of my humanity. There would be no backup coming for me. No more reports. Tomorrow they would find my clothes in the clearing, and that would be it. Maybe they'd find some tracks leading into the woods, and some of them would make a guess as to what had happened. But there was no way to know for sure. It would be just one more unsolved case to add to the pile. One more story to tell around the campfire. But tonight, I would be running alongside the pack, protecting the park from the outside world, and the outside world from the park, keeping the wolves from spreading the disease, and the disease from spreading to the wolves. I picked up the scent of the alpha and followed it into the woods, leaving my clothes and my old life behind. The night was full of possibilities. I could sense the presence of the other wolves, and I knew that they would soon be mine to command. The alpha would be the first to welcome me into the pack. I would run with them, learn from them, and in time, I would become one of them. And once I had learned everything there was to know about being a wolf, I would take my place as their leader, and I would hunt down those deer. The sun rose slowly over the mountains, casting long shadows across the forest floor. It had been a long night, and I had spent most of it running through the woods, chasing after the pack. I didn't remember much of it, but I had a feeling that I had enjoyed it. It had been exhilarating in a way, but now that the sun was up, I started to feel more like myself again. I managed to find my way back to the clearing where it all started. The moonlight dimmed, and I was on my hands and knees in the field, naked. My shredded clothing was nearby, and I was covered in dirt and blood. My fingers were crusted with mud and dried blood as well. The canister was in front of me, the top torn off. The papers were surrounding me. Some of them were shredded, others remained intact. I picked up one of the intact ones. "Don't," I said out loud, but my hand was already touching it. The patterns still moved, but I didn't feel the same connection to them as I had earlier. "Base to Jake, do you read me?" Sarah asked through the mangled radio, her voice faint. "We're sending in backup. What's your location?" I looked at the radio, not sure how to answer that. I still had a metallic taste on my tongue, and wasn't sure if it was my blood or not. "Jake," I said at last, my voice hoarse. "Alex Reed confirmed deceased. Killed by animal." There was static for a few seconds before she responded. "Copy that. What are the injuries?" I thought about the blood and the monsters, and my brain tried to block out the memories. Multiple. Numerous attackers. That wasn't quite right, but it would have to do. Big dogs. Potentially rabid. Another pause, then, "Did you discharge your weapon?" "Negative." I looked over at my rifle, still on the ground where I'd left it. "I was taken out of commission. Support is on the way. You are not to follow or engage. Is that understood?" "Hunter." I scoffed at that. Whatever had taken Alex had nothing to do with anything man-made. "Jake," Sarah said again, but more casual this time. "Are you sure you're all right?" I glanced at my hands again. Everything was different now. The moon was still calling to me. "I'm good," I said. Just get the teams." I picked up another paper from the canister, only partly burned. The symbols on it seemed to move, to change. I should throw them in the fire, I thought. Burn them all. But I couldn't. A part of me wanted to know. Just like Alex, just like all the other people who had been drawn to this place. They're going to come back, I said, even though Sarah was already gone. The messed up ones. They're going to want more. As if to answer my question, a howl came from the canyon behind me. It wasn't the Alpha's howl, though. It was one of the corrupted ones. I shivered at the thought of what they could do to me in my current state. I remembered the state we had found Alex in. What if they did that to me? The thought of those sharp teeth digging into my flesh made me shiver with fear. There was plenty of evidence to suggest that a struggle had taken place there. There was the remains of my uniform, the broken radio, and the pool of blood. But that didn't mean that I had to convince anyone of what had truly happened. I would report the incident just like everyone else did in these situations. I would tell the truth, knowing that the truth wasn't enough to explain what had happened. "I'm so sorry, Alex," I muttered as I picked up the last of the canister's contents. "I should have believed you." I heard a howl again, closer this time. There was a part of me that wanted to howl back, but I stifled it, clenching the bed sheets tightly. Sarah's voice came on the radio again. "Teams are 15 minutes out. Can you make it to the access road?" I looked at the trees and saw the pack was still out there. They were watching me, waiting to see what I would do. "No," I replied. "I'm staying here. Just tell them to bring lights. Lots of lights. Because something dark was stalking these mountains, wearing the skin of a wolf. And now I knew what they were hunting." I took Alex's backpack, my own shredded uniform, anything that might help explain what had happened here. I poured the contents of the canister into an evidence bag, with a feeling that it would not help to explain things. Then I went to the place where I had met the rescue teams and waited for them to find me. I touched my face, feeling the lingering effects of what I had become. The transformation had reversed, but I could sense it was still there, waiting to resurface. Just like the Alpha Pack, waiting for the next time I ventured into these woods. It would be a long time before the sun rose, and I had a lot of explaining to do. The long night was not over yet. It took several more hours before the floodlights arrived, along with the rest of the search parties. They interviewed me and asked me questions, but I barely remember any of it. I had to stay there until the morning, and I watched the stars disappear from the sky as I considered everything that had happened and what I would do next, and what I would do after that. I didn't want to stay out in the forest any longer than I had to, so I tried to make a signal fire right there in the clearing. But I couldn't get it started. The best I could manage was a little flicker of flame, but it didn't produce nearly enough smoke to be seen from a helicopter. I grabbed the flare gun and fired off 3 rounds in succession. The international distress signal for SOS. "Base, this is Jake." I cuffed and tried again. "Base, flares are out." "Same location as before." "Roger that, Jake." "Support is en route. Sit tight." I took note of his backpack, which he had placed carefully on the ground a few feet away from the gruesome scene. There was something shiny sticking out of the side of it. A compass. "You, Alex," I muttered, tears in my eyes. "You just couldn't leave it alone, could you?" I heard a twig snap and turned around. I thought of grabbing my rifle, but remembered it was all the way over there. The Alpha appeared at the edge of the tree line. Its eyes had lost some of their glow, but they were still eerily bright. "Here to admire your work." I was borderline feral. the old ranger code doing battle with urges I had yet to master. It came forward and stopped just at the end of the red soil. It bowed its head before looking up at me with those eyes again. "I don't know what to do with this," I said softly. "Any of it." My radio buzzed. "Jake, be advised, first team 5 minutes out. Any sign of hostile wildlife." The Alpha's ears twitched at the voice, and I saw its fur shimmer with that strange metallic hue, just like my skin had. "No," I said, still looking at the wolf. "I don't see anything." The beast's ears perked up as it heard something I couldn't detect, and it began to growl. "They're coming back, aren't they?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "The twisted ones." The wolf just turned around and disappeared back into the forest. I stood there for a long time, trying to figure out how I was going to explain all of this to the others. "Base, just a heads up," I said. "There's going to be some weird in my report." "Copy that," Sarah said after a few seconds. "Director Wilson is on his way. He requests that any strange objects be bagged for his inspection." I glanced at the bag, at the impossible symbols. Understood. The helicopter came into view, its spotlight casting eerie shadows across the clearing as it landed. I caught sight of something at the edge of the forest. A pair of glowing eyes. A hint of a snarl. The Alpha's pack hadn't left me. They were watching, waiting to see how I would handle the aftermath. I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves. I would have to deal with my new reality, but not right now. First, I had to make sure the truth didn't come out. The helicopter touched down, and I prepared to meet my colleagues. To face them as a ranger who had just witnessed a massacre, and not as the monster I was destined to become. "Let's give them the truth they deserve," I said to myself, but not the whole truth. I heard a howl coming from behind me. It wasn't a howl of a hunt or a howl of warning. It was a howl of reminder. I was part of their world now, and they were part of mine. When the twisted ones came back, they would come back for more victims, more people to transform into their likeness. But this time, we would be ready. The helicopter pilot shut down the engine, and a dozen rangers with guns spread out to secure the area. I took a deep breath and turned around. It was time to explain to the investigation team what had happened. I had a story ready, one that would match the official version, one that wouldn't reveal the existence of the wolves, and by extension, the twisted ones. It was a story that would keep the three of us safe. The sun had come up, but the darkness had given me something that I never could have gotten in the light. 3 days passed as if in a dream. I was debriefed and examined by the authorities, and I gave them the answers I knew they wanted to hear. It didn't take long before an investigation team was sent out, and I was back at the same spot where everything had taken place. After a couple of hours, the sun began to rise over the trees, changing the shapes of the shadows. Even still, there were parts of the forest which remained cloaked in darkness. I had gone through several evidence bags before finding one which would contain the object. It kept squirming and moving, and the rectangles and squares of the reader were coming through the plastic, as if bleeding through it. A few minutes later, I heard the sound of a helicopter approaching. I heard something moving behind me, but I didn't turn around. "Base, I see them, over," I said into my half-broken radio. "Roger that, Jake. Director Wilson wants this thing contained." I wanted to laugh. Contain what? The blood on the ground. The echoing howls that had no source. The memories of my body transforming. Roger that. A helicopter landed about 50 yards away, blowing the leaves on the trees with the wind from its rotors. A few seconds later, 4 park rangers emerged, armed with rifles. A forensics team also exited the chopper, dressed in white suits. "Hey, I'm here," I said, waving my hand. Last to emerge from the helicopter was Director Wilson. He glanced at the bloodstains in the backpack on the ground, then at my ripped uniform. "Rofe Knight, Jake?" he asked. "Key West, sir," I said. The crime scene team was taking photos and putting down evidence markers, unaware of the fact that the blood they were labeling belonged to a man who'd opened a door to something far older than mankind. "All right, tell me what happened," Wilson said, leading us away from the commotion. I took a deep breath, smelling ozone and blood. Alex Reed entered the restricted area despite warnings. His emergency beacon went off at Zozener 300. I followed it here and found evidence of... I trailed off, remembering the things I'd seen. "What kind of signs?" "Big predators," I muttered. "Working in groups, but not right. Like rabies, but coordinated." Wilson didn't seem surprised by this, but he asked, "What about the canister?" I gave him the evidence bag. "Huh," he said, but squeezed the handle a little tighter. A young woman brought over what was left of Alex's jacket. "Sir, you might want to take a look at this." We followed her to where Alex's backpack was lying on the ground. She pointed at something inside the bag. It was made of metal, and I saw it was his compass. The needle was spinning in circles. "Electromagnetic interference," the tech asked. "Take it," Wilson said. "Take everything." I watched as they went through the evidence, but I knew they would never find a place to put this in a box. It didn't fit. "The wolves?" Wilson said softly. "Did you see their eyes?" I turned to him. "Sir, forget it." He adjusted his blazer. "I'll expect you to write up your full account by the end of your shift. Just the verifiable details. Observable facts. Like how the blood of Alex had steamed when it hit the ground. Like how those mutated wolves had moved in ways that defied physics. Like how the moon had reached down into my DNA and pulled something out of it." "Yes, sir," I said. A howl echoed from down in the canyon, distantly at first, but then more clearly. The equipment began to feed back, and the Rangers raised their weapons. "At ease," Wilson called. "It's just some wildlife." But he was staring at me with a look that said he knew what I was talking about. "Sir," I said, "about last night. Write it all in the report, Jake." He put his hand on my shoulder, lowering his voice. "Some things are just better left unsaid." "All right." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of responsibility taking hold. The sun was rising in the sky, and the shadows were stretching across the ground. From the corner of my eye, I saw a flash of gray fur in the underbrush. It was gone before I could get a good look. "Jake," said Wilson, pausing to get my attention. "Yes." "If I were you, I wouldn't ask too many questions about what happened last night." "Well, you..." He left me standing there, staring after him. The helicopter took off, leaving me alone in the clearing. I stood there for a while longer, looking at the place where the bodies had been, listening to the wind in the trees. I had a report to write. I wondered what I should say about all this. Should I tell the truth, or leave it out? The ride back to headquarters was uneventful. I thought about what I'd seen and heard, trying to make sense of it all. It was a lot to process, and I wasn't sure I would ever be able to. But one thing was for certain. I would never look at the woods the same way again. I was completing some paperwork at the visitor center later in the day, filling out incident reports and trying to get the bizarre symbols on the evidence bags out of my mind. "That's it for now, Ranger," Director Wilson said, picking up the pile of freshly wiped paperwork. "I want you to take some time off. Think things over." I nodded, not wanting to try speaking. The sound of the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead was like nails on a chalkboard. "Oh, and Jake," Wilson said, stopping at the door. "Some of the other rangers have mentioned that you're acting a little bit off. Try to fix that. Different." I thought of Alex, of silver eyes and skeletal limbs crawling through the night. "Yes, sir. I will." The visitor center was closing up for the day. Only a few people were left, and they gave me a wide berth as I walked through. It was as if they knew something was different about me, as if they could tell I was dangerous. I went outside and looked at the mountains, seeing them for the first time with my new eyes. I could see so much more detail. I could hear things I'd never heard before. The parking lot was almost empty, but instead of going to my truck and getting in, I found myself heading for the Thunder Lake Trail. "Hey, nice night for a hike," another hiker called out to me nervously. "Yep. Follow the main trails. Make sure you leave before it gets dark," I responded instinctively. She passed by, whispering to the person she was with, "Did you see his eyes?" I didn't need to look in a mirror to know what she had seen. The change was still partly there, and it was obvious in my eyes and the way I moved. There was a shine to my pupils that glinted silver, and my movements had an unnatural, almost fluid quality. The trail eventually led to an overlook, a popular spot for tourists to take pictures of the mountains behind them. But I could see more than just mountains now. I could see the places where the world was thin, and where the old ones had left their mark on the world in ways that most people would never understand. "Told you, man," I said, even though Alex couldn't hear me. "You came to me with your theories so many times." The wind whispered through the trees, and a moment later, I heard the sound of footsteps approaching. "Good evening, Jake." I turned around to see Sarah from dispatch standing a few feet away. Sarah. "What are you doing out here? I was worried about you. That was a lot to witness earlier today." I wondered for a moment if she knew more than she let on. How many other people who worked here knew about these mountains? "You ever ask yourself why some places don't appear on our maps?" She frowned, as if that were a question I shouldn't be asking. That's what my brother used to say, before he started getting answers. There was a howl in the distance, not the Alpha's pack, but a different one. One of the new ones. Sarah reached for her radio. "I need to report that." "Forget it," I said, casting my eyes back to the mountains. "This isn't going in any incident report." There was a pause, then she said, "The director told me you're going on leave. Just for a few days. I have to get used to it." "Used to what, Jake?" I let her see what I had seen. She didn't look away. "To the truth about our park," I said quietly. "To the real reason we're out here protecting it." A low rumble came from the sky, but it wasn't cloudy. "Just be safe," she said. "Whatever you found up there. Some things can't be unseen." I watched as she walked back to the visitor center, not even bothering to call in on her radio. The sun was setting on the horizon, and the sky was turning a dark crimson red. And I could hear the whispers of the night. The Alpha came walking out of the deep forest, looking at me. I watched it back. It wasn't a subordinate look. It was a look of respect. We were partners now. Partners in keeping this place safe from the powers of the night. I could hear the howls of the shadow wolves in the distance, and I knew they were on the hunt. But this time, they wouldn't get far. I took off my jacket and let the transformation begin. There was no need for me to report back to anyone. The story of the shadow wolves didn't end with me. It would be told by the howls of the night, in a language no human could understand. And it was true what Alex had said. The wolves knew where to find the mysteries of the dark. And now, so did I. The Alpha stood still until the sun had set completely.